The inherently difficult aspect of creating a prequel that is engrossing and ultimately successful is the fact that the creator is providing the viewer an appetizer after they've already consumed their entree. Now, Better Call Saul is both a prequel and a sequel, though in this particular video, I'm, for the most part, going to be discussing the show's prequel-related elements, which I only briefly touched on in a past BCS video or two, which are, I truly believe, perfectly incorporated into this series. For example, classic characters from Saul's parent series aren't aimlessly shoved in, so that Breaking Bad fans can point at the screen and grin based off of sheer recognition. Every returning character does so with purpose. Apart from a few welcomed and wonderful appearances by the talented Ray Cruz's Tuco, we don't really delve into the rivalries with and within the cartel until mid-season 2. Mike meets Hector in episode 205. Jimmy McGill doesn't technically become Saul Goodman until the season 4 finale. And we don't get an appearance from our legendary Breaking Bad duo until the final episodes of the series. When it comes to Better Call Saul, Peter Gould and company thankfully steer clear of any sort of over-reliance on its parent series or audience pandering. The writers simply let the stories unfurl whilst infusing a sense of organic fluidity. As I mentioned, BCS is not just a Breaking Bad prequel, but also a sequel. Therefore, in the final run of episodes, the writers aren't just saying goodbye to Better Call Saul, but the entire gilli-verse, as it's been called, as a whole. A question I've been asked repeatedly by curious Breaking Bad fans who have yet to see BCS is, can you watch Better Call Saul on its own? Or is the viewing of Breaking Bad imperative for Better Call Saul's biggest fans? Here is my simple, honest answer. Watching Breaking Bad prior to BCS will greatly deepen and enhance your Better Call Saul experience, but it is not an absolute necessity in regards to being able to comprehend this show's plot. Fan favorite Gustavo Fring is introduced in episode 302, in which we see Gus's seemingly friendly and professional side, who manages a chicken shop, before his duality is displayed in the subsequent episode, in which we not only see Gus's dealings outside of the law, but also learn of Gus's hatred toward Hector Salamanca. Then in episode 304, Sambrosito were introduced to classic cartel characters, Don Eladio and Juan Bolsa, as well as Hector's jealousy toward Gus. In season 5, we hear via a grinning Lalo that the Salamancas are responsible for the murder of Gustavo's boyfriend. Earlier in the season, when Gus is attempting to lock Mike up as a long-term employee, we see this grand fountain structure, to which Gus refers to as a memorial. All of the most prominent touchstones in Gus's life and career are subtly incorporated, again, so that you understand this character and his motives without having seen Breaking Bad. Now, before I delve into what I believe to be Walt's perfect incorporation into BCS, I'm first going to discuss the implementation of the dynamic DEA duo consisting of Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez. This classic pair appears in episode 3 and 4 of Better Call Saul's 5th season. For Breaking Bad fans, this brief set of appearances is instantaneously entertaining. But in the long run, in the context of the show in its entirety, when we see Marie and then Blanca Gomez referred to as widows in the series finale, we understand how these characters fit into this story. Their primary function in this last episode is that they are still grieving victims of the nefarious Walt and Saul duo. And that fact is simply more effective, given that we've been given a couple BCS episodes to humanize this classic pair. Now, Walter White / Heisenberg naturally appears in episode 611, Breaking Bad, but he is referenced in the episode prior entitled Nippy. Jeff the cab driver states to Gene whilst the pair are preparing for their shopping mall heist that this plan is crazy. Gene responds with the following words, verbatim, "Crazy? I'll tell you what's crazy. 50-year-old high school chemistry teacher comes into my office. The guy's so broke he can't pay his own mortgage. A year later, he's got a pile of cash the size of a Volkswagen. That's crazy." Now, Walt isn't mentioned by name here, but in the episode subsequent to this, when Walt is physically introduced into BCS, we hear Mike's general breakdown of his resume, which includes the fact that Heisenberg is a chemistry teacher at J.P. Wynn High School. In just 2 episodes of Better Call Saul, completely taking Breaking Bad out of the equation, we learn that Walter Hartwell White is a chemistry teacher with lung cancer, as well as a notorious drug manufacturer codenamed Heisenberg, who evidently has a past with Saul, and all all of this information is important, as the character of Walt is a prevalent component in Saul's series finale. We even get a rendition of Walt monologuing about his disdain toward his ex-friends and former business partners, Gretchen and Elliot, who are running a multi-billion-dollar corporation of which Walt was once a prevalent part. I really appreciate that the writers not only provide us the necessary information we need to understand who Walt was to Saul, but they even humanize him here. He's not much of an empathetic chap at this point in his life, but this vulnerable moment of his enhances the story, again taking Breaking Bad out of the equation, as Walt, who plays a part in quite a bit of part 2 of BCS's final season, is now evidently a complex Better Call Saul character. Now, the last thing I'm going to discuss is a particular prequel-centric element and its relation to BCS. This element is having the prequel story essentially end where the parent series begins. This is not a narrative necessity by any means, I've just seen it utilized in the past. Now, as I've stated incessantly, BCS is so much more than a prequel, so it very much ends on its own terms. But what Peter Gould and company do is they take certain characters and, nearing Better Call Saul's end, present these characters or put them in situations in which they find themselves upon their Breaking Bad introductions. I am specifically going to be discussing the characters of Hector, Jesse, and Gus. Hector's addition to the show was not only organic, but also the perfect prequel addition. When we meet him in Breaking Bad in episode 202, Hector is a wheelchair-bound, mute individual who communicates via a bell, whereas when we meet him in Better Call Saul episode 205, he is a confident, walking, talking gangster trying to pay Mike off. So you're instinctively and instantaneously asking yourself, how exactly does Hector end up in his wheelchair? That very question adds a constant sense of tension whenever he's on screen, and like so many of the show's elements, the writers take their time in answering the question. The answer isn't given to us until the season 3 finale, exactly a season and a half after his BCS introduction. As a result, he essentially and literally loses his voice. And not only is he immobile after already being an annoyance to Bolsa and talking about Eladio, but he then spends too much of his time incessantly complaining and ringing his bell about Gus and his supposed disloyalty. And even though he's right, Gus fraudulently proves to the cartel that Hector's accusations are simply untrue. Eladio states his irritation with Hector and his bell as he literally has Hector carried away, Eladio mocking him in the process. This to me symbolizes Hector's kind of removal as an active member of the cartel. He now has zero power and has lost practically any inkling of respect from his business cohorts. This very clearly paves the path toward Hector ultimately living in the desert in rather secluded fashion with Tuco as his carer. The cartel has grown tired of Hector and his seemingly baseless and constant accusations toward Gus. And his initial loss of speech and movement spelled out from the beginning that such power players as Eladio and Bolsa simply don't really have to put up with him anymore. Now on to Jesse Pinkman. Now, the Jesse from the Breaking Bad pilot and the Jesse from El Camino are vastly different. The former is a humorous punk, while the latter is a jaded, resourceful badass. In his final BCS performance in episode 612, Paul is very much playing that young season 1 or slightly before season 1 Jesse. Not only is his demeanor rather youthful and bouncy, but we also see that he is accompanying Emilio, with whom Jesse is associated in the Breaking Bad pilot episode alone. Another great little moment that ties together BCS with its parent series. Jesse reminds Kim that she once defended his friend, Christian Combo Ortega. Now lastly, onto Gus. Gus's final appearance in BCS episode 609 is super intriguing, and one which I could have in no way predicted. The scene to which I'm referring features Gustavo in a light in which we have simply never before seen him. This piece features a bashful, delightedly intent, verging on endearing Gus, as he flirts with a server with whom he is evidently familiar, as the pair discuss the topic of wine. It is simply fascinating to see such an utterly coy Mr. Fring, as we have witnessed him perform such heartless and brutal acts throughout the series. In a brilliant final moment, once his server friend David has briefly departed his presence, we focus in on Gus's expression, which gradually fades from content to practically emotionless, though intensely determined. But once Gus's facial expression has completely altered, he leaves the bar instead of waiting for his friend who was going to retrieve a bottle to show to Gustavo. This small piece is really interesting, especially in retrospect. What we're essentially getting here is the last moment in which Gus indulges himself with genuine, unrelated to business human connection. But he realizes and reminds himself at scene's end that in order to accomplish this massively successful empire, he must cut himself off from any potential relationship. There's a substantial amount of delicious subtext here that I've grown to expect from this brilliant creative team.